cat and a slide.
Okay, let's take a look at, make sure I get my right screen up as we do this.
Sure thing.
So, fun times. We were just before we started getting rid of cats and I started getting everything running, we were talking about meeting students online. And I found it interesting when you're talking about how I think you're about to say how your students, even at the college level, enjoy pets on camera.
Absolutely.
It's not just your first graders or your eighth graders. It's your freshmen and seniors at the undergraduate level as well. And I'm sure it's the same thing for graduate students.
Yeah. And I think part of it is for the undergrads, right? They're away from home. And so a lot of them are actually away from their pets, right? And so they're missing their pets. So I think any sort of connection like that for them it's particularly rewarding to see that like normalcy, somebody's pet walking around like this one just decided to do.
It's common on like a lot of streams on Twitch as well. If someone sees a pet, it's just like, oh my God, look at the pet. Oh, your dog.
Yep.
Oh.
Yep.
It's like automatic engagement. And,
right.
And I know at my level, at the the high school level and even the elementary level, any kind of engagement with your talk or your lecture, your stream is good. So if it takes a pet to get your students to like start participating in some manner, then so be it. It's better than them just sitting there and not responding. It's almost like an icebreaker,
Yeah, totally. And they see you as a little bit more human also, sometimes there's a bit, that barrier, as the instructor can be a bit dehumanizing almost. And this one, I'm trying to keep this cat out of the way.
Maybe you shouldn't keep the catnip like right there next to the microphone.
Yeah, right.
What were you thinking?
No, they know that like this is where in the office, if I'm working late at night, they're like, oh, of course you must have more time for me. And that's not the case. But what are you going to do?
Well, thankfully, I don't let my dogs upstairs. So they would be all over me. They stay downstairs. So if I really wanted to entertain, I could bring the dogs up. But then they would never leave me alone.
Right. Well, when I know I have to do work and when classes lock the door and all that stuff,
Yep.
chair up against the doors.
Chair up against it. So how's that going at Siena? How's everybody doing?
Overall, I think honestly, it's gone, I think, as well as anybody could have hoped. We are still below the threshold, in terms of requiring to go remote. And I think that is because the students have just been amazing. They wear their mat. I've been teaching remotely. We all had our the instructors all had their choice whether or not they wanted to be in person. And I've gone to campus to meet with students at times, and they are like masks on, wash their desks down when they come in, wash their desks when they leave. Except, there's been a couple of incidents of parties, but overall, everybody's been fantastic. And I think it's really a credit to the students, as well as the faculty, the staff, the cleaning staff of cleaning stuff. It's been good. And then we've also been doing wastewater monitoring. There's been a faculty member in the environmental science department, and this summer she worked with some students to learn how to sample water. So once a day, you sample water over a 24-hour period from about 5 or 6 points on campus, and you can see when there's like kind of hot spots, when there's like maybe 1, 2, 3 people in the dorms that might be positive and they're shedding the virus, it's going into the water. And that's helped direct some of the testing, which is this surveillance testing, testing a few percent of the population. Right. So we've only got 2 weeks left.
I think it was SUNY Binghamton that was one of the first schools to do the wastewater testing.
I think they might be in New York, Syracuse, I think also. And I think actually this started like in Arizona. There was a big thing about how Arizona was actually able to, there was a school, I don't know if it was University of Arizona or Arizona State. They actually were able to kind of almost nip an outbreak in the bud because they found that there was someone or a couple people positive in this dorm. They found 1 positive case out of 300, which is pretty good sensitivity. They, after testing the whole dorm. So there's actually, so I work with the group that does this on like the data analysis part of it, which is kind of making some helpful plots. There's other people that are really doing the legwork, and it's a testament to our dean, John Cummings, and Professor Kate Meyer-Dirks in the environmental science department, who her and her students really do a lot of the legwork of taking the data of the water samples. It's been, I think, very helpful to kind of see where there might be hotspots, and they've got this up and running, and there's a network of people in New York as well as the Northeast that are doing this. And people are starting to share knowledge about how to do this properly, and science, right? This is all science. I've learned some stuff. Everybody who's been working on this.
I think really it's interesting how you're talking about like that cross-curricular, like you, a physics professor, you're working with, the biology department probably, amongst, and probably some other departments to kind of collaborate and make it happen. I mean, how often, does that happen usually? I don't know.
Yeah. Not often. We tend to, as much as we try not to be, everybody gets so busy, everybody gets very siloed in their departments and stuff. So this has been a nice, opportunity to work, like I said, with our environmental science department, someone from our computer science department, someone else who teaches some of our applied physics classes, building like a homemade water sampler and stuff as well.
Do you think that'll spill over like into next year and the year after, that collaboration?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're already talking about what to do in the spring. The samples, we take about 5 or 6 points on campus in a 24-hour period, and that gets sent out to a lab in Syracuse. There's about a 2 or 3 day wait period for them to get the data back to us. And so now we've got this system going. I think it'll absolutely be used to the spring. Now, Siena has decided not to start classes until like 3rd or 4th week of February. So we're really pushing back our start date, which I think is the right thing to do. And then this should be a part of our campus monitoring. It's like monitoring the wastewater, learning how to do this more consistently, and understand the data better.
I just think that's, when I first read that, I was like, that's fascinating, because that's something that you couldn't have done, that quick of a turnaround of testing. I don't know when that technology became available. It's just amazing.
Yeah, and apparently there have been other cases of cities actually testing wastewater for this type of thing. My wife was a faculty member for a few years at Northern Illinois University in DeKalb, and one of her colleagues there used to go around and test like the waterbed, like the water, just groundwater, and you would actually see evidence of like meth labs in the area because they would dump some of the chemicals into the ground and it would seep and spread. So this idea of like cities and municipalities doing water testing to look for signs of lots of different things is not new. Obviously COVID is a new use case, and it's generated actually a lot of discussions about like privacy issues, right? So we're testing student water from students, refuse, if you will, and if one was really maybe paranoid's not the right word, but it's an open question as to who does this belong to. I think everybody has come to the decision, and like I said, this is not just us, this has been municipalities and other colleges, that like once you poop and pee, it's in the system, it's not yours anymore.
Right.
But what if Siena or another college wanted to start testing for drugs or doing pregnancy tests on the wastewater? Does that start to go and get into privacy issues? And we're not doing that by any means, but it has generated a lot of discussion about things that I wouldn't have thought about prior to all of this.
Yep. And that's what I was thinking. I'm like, oh, it's like your trash, That's why the cop shows, they always show them going through people's trash, because then it's, it's not yours anymore.
That's right.
Yeah. So
it's a new world order.
But it does raise, some ethical issues. It's like, do you want to relook at that? I mean, but at the same time, you have to, I think it's like, this is for the public good in a way. It's kind of like, right. You're not, unless they can somehow connect your DNA to your social security number, they're not looking at it for you. They're just looking at trends.
That's exactly right. And if you look at some of the decisions that have gone on, like legal decisions, it does come down to this idea of public good. And when we're testing the water coming out of either these dorms or really collections of dorms, depending on where you're, you're actually sampling, you're talking about sampling the wastewater from anywhere from 300, 400 students. I think at minimum, it's like 250 students. So that's a huge number. You're not going to be able to drill down and isolate any one individual. And again, I emphasize it's nothing we're interested in. You just want to know, is there signs of someone shedding the coronavirus in this system? And we in this group, you talk about poop a lot, you talk about pee, it's like, it's like almost like, when I was a new father and you're talking about that kind of stuff all the time. But you talk about normalizing when they are looking for the coronavirus, you actually normalize the amount to other viruses that are just normally found in like fecal matter and stuff like that. So again, it's generated this interesting discussion. Like, this is a field that I know nothing about, and all of us have started to learn about. Even Dr. Meyer-Dirks, Kate Meyer-Dirks in environmental science, who's really spearheading this effort. Her usual research is groundwater, and for her, she's also learning a lot about like sampling, this type of wastewater. We're all growing and learning as scientists as we do this.
Right, and imagine the students that are having the experience of doing. I mean, this is like amazing for them.
This is real stuff.
It's they can get a nice published paper out of it.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we talked about, we've had some discussions about what is the point of this? Is it just for kind of monitoring the safety on campus? Is there some sort of scientific research we get out of it? Like you said, some paper, and we've talked about the idea of actually doing some minimal. One of the people working in the group actually is in the economics department, and we've talked about looking at this almost from an economic standpoint and how you assess resource, use of resources on campus. There is information, however, like if I'm going to be like a really, really nerdy scientist, there's information you would want if you did a science paper that we don't have because of privacy issues. So like, knowing that there's a dorm that is hot, let's say that there's someone in there. At this point, there are privacy issues where we can't know when people are tested on campus if that person came from the dorm at this point in time. And we're going through some of the legal discussions. We can't know if there was someone who was tested, quarantined somewhere else, and then came back, right? So they're not symptomatic, but they might still be shedding the virus. And if you were trying to, like, let's say, calibrate, the wastewater, you would want to know, hey, we measured this much signal in the wastewater that, and we know that there were 3 people who tested positive. Like, we don't have that one-to-one matching. But there might be something when everything is said and done. Again, because Siena is not doing a full campus-wide testing the way, Union colleges or, Cornell University, some of the schools where they're testing the entire campus population once a week. We're not doing that. We're testing, 4 or 5% of the campus every week or so. But there might be a discussion about how this has helped us, direct our resources to, where, if we think a dorm is hot, we might really direct that, 5, 6, 7% of our testing to that dorm. And
right,
so
and also direct like the custodial staff to that dorm type of thing.
Yeah. Or sometimes, and what we tend to do, actually, the interventions tend to be more like social engineering, like going to the people in the dorm and saying, hey, someone in this 300 student body is probably positive. We're trying to figure out who it is. But in the meantime, everybody's really got to step up, and everybody's already good, but you really got to now raise the game of everybody, don't shake hands, don't do stuff like that. So,
Oh, yeah. And I was also wondering, how is like the physics department itself going? Like, how is your individual research kind of, going on? Is that, because I know a lot of what you do is done kind of remotely anyways, as far as accessing data and things like that. So it's not like you have to go into a lab necessarily to do some of it.
No, that's very, very true. The thing that is in short supply, however, is time. And so, so my research is primarily at the Large Hadron Collider. The data is accessible remotely. Like you said, I log in, I get the data, I download it from either CERN directly in Europe, or I download it from Fermilab just outside of Chicago. And, I have a number of projects going on, and I have negative time to work on most of them, right? Because, with teaching, I'm teaching 3 different classes. One of them is entirely in an asynchronous online format, which is new for me. The others, the other classes where it's still remote require, a bit more work and effort, to be honest with you, to kind of make sure everybody's engaged. The one thing that I'm very happy about that we were able to pull together, and it's only because it's been like a year and a half in the planning, is that at the end of October, some colleagues and we ran a workshop virtually, remote, for open data access for theorists. So the experiment that I work on, the CMS experiment, is one of the real leaders, I will say, without any trace of, false modesty for the people that are doing the work. They're one of the real leaders in making subsets of the data open and available to anyone. And this is not simplified formats like I use for outreach efforts or to engage students in the classroom. This is like the real data that the analysts and the experimentalists use. It's access to the full software analysis stack, which means it's very complicated. But about 2 years ago, there was a theorist at MIT who normally wouldn't interact with data, but he and his students actually were able to get some publications out. And so this spurred the idea of a workshop to teach theorists how to more easily access the data. So this summer we were working to get everything together, like really in a crunch time. And then somehow we pulled it off. We did a 3-day workshop. I basically canceled classes. I didn't cancel classes. I had a bunch of asynchronous work for the students to do for 3 days. And we had, the other 2 organizers, one of them was in Finland, one of them was in Ecuador. A bunch of the organizers were located at Fermilab just outside of Chicago. And then we had participants in Europe and India and South America. And so to your point about being virtual, there are benefits that you can run stuff like this. But it was a tremendous amount of work. And I'm still, to be honest with you, like digging out and catching up from that. And that's part of my research. Part of my research is this engagement and learning how to make these open data sets more available to the public. But the thing that, and I hear this from my colleagues also, like so many of us that are teaching are so short on time. And even people that are, just experimentalists, everybody has so much on their plate right now. And it's a real issue. And then the other thing that's taking place in the background of all of this, in terms of like just time that everybody, is spending on stuff, there is an effort taking place in the particle physics community called SNOMAS 2021. And this is a US community-wide effort to try to map out the next 10 years of particle physics. And this was following up on, a similar effort. It was at a place called SNOMAS in Minnesota. The name has stuck, where 10 years ago, hundreds of particle physicists in the US basically got together, formed working groups and said, what do we think are the important questions that we want to answer? What are the important facilities that we want to fund? How do we make this happen? And that is taking place right now. And, there's a bunch of us that are working on, white papers and studies for this. And there's a benefit to like you said, we have all this technology, we can do things remotely, we can have these virtual meetings, we can have these polls. But I think a lot of people do talk about there's a benefit to being kind of physically in the room that you don't get exactly from a virtual interaction. There's the coffee time discussions, there's hanging out after the official meeting with your colleagues, many of whom are friends, and just, talking about whatever in a social way that actually still gives rise to real, physics ideas. And
science is often done on that cocktail napkin, as they say.
100%.
Right?
Yes. Yes. It's a stereotype.
You're in the pub and you're like, oh, I got an idea. Let's write it down and think about it. It's not at the conference itself.
Yes. And you can say, well, I'll bring up a Jamboard instead of a cocktail napkin. And it's just not the same. So, everybody's still moving forward, and the SNOMAS effort is taking place, and there's lots of online, mailing lists, and, the organizers are doing these Herculean efforts of pulling together literally hundreds of people, hundreds of ideas. But I think that very few people would argue that a purely virtual interactions is better than like the mix that we used to have, and nobody's pushing to like get together in person. We've had many physics meetings that have been canceled, because of science, because we understand the science. So everybody's working on stuff, but I think everybody's still like, it's like, oh my gosh.
There's definite benefits to, the virtual, like you're saying. You get people from all over the world together easily to talk.
Yes.
For reduced cost, right?
Yep, absolutely. And reduced environmental impact. There's a lot of talk about like there's a less environmental impact with these. But, I've made this joke a few times. I'm sure I picked it up on Twitter or somewhere else, but I keep thinking about it. Like, I miss being at a conference, getting the stale coffee, getting the little paper plate of like cheese cubes and a couple crackers and a few sad little grapes and stuff like that. And then go back, get some coffee and a little, maybe a granola bar. Like I miss kind of the bad to mediocre conference food, but all the social interactions that come along with it. I miss taking students to these things because, there's been a few virtual meetings that I've engaged students in where we've like zoomed into something. And in April, I gave a talk, an invited talk at the APS, the American Physical Society meeting about open data. But I miss there's a number of students that I've traveled with from Siena. Some of them have never been on an airplane before, or maybe some of them have never been, outside of New York State. And, to take them to like a new city, because you're at the conference, but you always make sure you find time to we're in Denver, we're going to go for a hike,
Right.
We're in, where's some of the other places that we've gone down? We're in Chicago, we're going to go to this place where Enrico Fermi, had the first controlled nuclear reaction. And I really like that aspect of the physics education, helping provide these other just kind of life experiences for students, and I hope we get back to that point because I feel like that is part of college. It's not just about the intake of information. It's kind of just, getting the opportunity to see the world, interact with, graduate students and professors at other places, like face to face in a way that Zoom isn't. I hope we can get back to that point, at some point.
Same thing in K-12, all these kids that don't get to go on their trip to wherever, whether it's Gettysburg or DC or just, to your local, museum. New York State Museum, it's like
American Museum of Natural.
So many kids that they've never been in a hotel before, and you take them to a hotel and they're like freaking out, or they've never been outside the state.
The first times staying in a hotel, absolutely, it was like growth experience,
and that is part of trying to provide an education for kids. It's always more than just the content and your field of study. That's what I think kids are really missing out on with this whole thing. They can get a lot of the education, not as well as I think as in person, but certain things you definitely can do. I can give you a simulation for like a physics lab, but actually doing it yourself, having something tangible, it does help your learning, as well.
So when we went remote in the spring, I wasn't teaching the intro classes at the time, but I'd been working for about a year on these design-based labs. We've been, they're referred to as these labs that are much more open-ended for the Gen Phys program. Yep. And the idea is you give the students much less instructions, and you're also kind of asking them to do less, but it's a bit more open-ended. And when we went, this emergency remote, I was like, we can do this. We can do remote labs because, as you said, the simulations, watching a video, they're good to a point, but they're not the same. And so we decided in the end to allow students to opt into doing these at-home labs. And about a dozen students out of 60 decided to opt in. And so I ordered a bunch of stuff off of Amazon and put together these packets and sent it out to about half of those students because half of them had it at home. And it was really interesting thinking about, okay, I'm a student at home. I've got to think about, equity issues. Not every student is going to have their parents aren't going to have necessarily a full basement with construction equipment in it. What are the measurements that I could potentially ask a student to make at home? And it was actually really rewarding. I think most of the students actually really enjoyed it. They had 2 weeks to work on it, so we expanded it. And some of the students, the feedback was like, I start to see physics everywhere now. I was trying to set up this pendulum system at home, and now I see all these opportunities for making measurements around, which was very rewarding because I 100% agree with you. There is something different about trying to get it to work, having it fail, trying to fix it, having it fail again, and then finally getting it working, that is very, very satisfying as compared to like watching a video, which again, sometimes you've got to do, to deliver the content, but it's a different experience that they're learning when they're trying to build their own experiment.
I also think it's different when you're doing it at home, because then it's like, it's your home versus I'm doing it at school, but physics applies there in that area, but not outside of it,
Yes.
Whereas if you're doing it at home, even my students, that the parents are like, what's going on? What's happening? And then they have to explain it to like a brother or a sister or a parent.
Yeah.
And guess what? That's when the learning happens, because then they have to teach someone else what the heck they're doing. So
that's a great point. So if you're ever looking for inspiration, there is a professor and I was able to talk with her before we started this real shift in our thing. There's a professor at Cornell named Natasha Holmes, and Professor Holmes, her work has been in a lot of labs and a lot of how you engage the students in a way that they're really learning about experimental approaches. And her and one of her colleagues, Carl Wyman, had a very influential paper in Physics Today in 2018 that was said, that was basically, we can do better with labs. And so I follow her and some of the stuff that they're doing at Cornell and what they did. And if I had seen this before we did our remote learning, I would have incorporated it. They had their remote students try to do the lab on their own. And then they kept the lab groups such that the lab groups then had to get together on Zoom and discuss what was and wasn't working in their experiments. And then they went back to their bedrooms or their living rooms or their kitchens, wherever they were at home and running the experiment, and then tried to do it again. And they were very good about maintaining exactly what you're talking about, this idea of like discussing and explaining to each other, because that's where a lot of the learning takes place. I tried to do this, what wasn't working? Oh, I didn't have this folded the right way or something like that. And going forward, I think that that's something like I would love it if at Siena, and not everybody 100% agrees with me on this, but I think we're moving. I would love it if even if we go back to regular classes, I think we should absolutely have a component of the lab that the students have to do back in their dorm. Because like you said, we want to emphasize that physics is not something that happens just in the classroom, it's in the world around us.
Yep. And I tried in the spring, I did some labs where the kids had that choice, like you said, where they could opt in to do it at home. And it was an equity thing. I had no budget, of course, so I couldn't just make kits for them. But like I had one where they had to make a weather instrument, right? And there's like, there's a thousand different ways to make different weather instruments. And then as like if you have nothing, you could at least go outside, look at the clouds, and make observations about types of clouds and coverage and things like that. So that one worked out pretty well. And I did a few other ones that are really simple, physics demos that worked out really well on like air pressure and stuff like that. So
cool.
But I saw a bunch of cups and with water and paper falling. It was great, but it was tough for the kids.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
It was fun.
Yep. So I had the students try to do a lab, right? So one of the things I kept thinking about was this idea of like, if the students don't have like timing, like really accurate timing stuff at home, like they don't have like the photo gates where you can like hook it up to like, your Chromebook and like measure the time and stuff. And I've been thinking a lot about how you measure time and stuff like that. And so, and I had to work it out by myself by hand. So I gave the students a challenge. I said, imagine you have a pendulum and you have, so talking about like equity and stuff like that, I was able to buy a little, nut, a little metal hex nut and a string for the students, or they could do it at home. And so you make a pendulum of some length. Now you attach one end of the pendulum to a wall and you pull it out and you let it hit the wall. Okay, so that's one. So that's a time. So you pull it out, see if it hits. Now you take another hex nut, and if the length of the string is H, you hold the hex nut above the ground and you drop it. which strikes first, the pendulum striking the wall or this hex nut dropping? And you ask the students to experimentally determine which happens first.
See, that's
or
great.
do they happen at the same time, right? And you say you can do it with any length thing you want. And very quickly they learn that if you've just got a short length, right? And so you say, well, how am I supposed to do that? Do I use a timer? But you lead them through the idea of what you want to do is you want to just try to see if you can hear if they're simultaneous. If you release them at the same time, are they simultaneous? And this is how a lot of old experiments were done, by like listening to things. So you listen to them, and then they learn, oh, I can hear differences better if it's a longer length of string, and it's a higher height above the ground.
So you're saying Galileo didn't have a photo gate? Is that what you're trying to say?
Exactly. And I kept thinking about, well, how did Galileo do stuff like this? That's exactly what I was thinking about. And it turns out that the time difference between them, if the time for one of them is a second, the other is about 1 1/3 seconds. So once you get to a long enough length of string, you can actually hear the difference. And so then I asked them to be like, okay, now vary the height so that they are simultaneous, and you can make a plot and stuff like that. There's an uncertainty in there because you can't always drop it. And honestly, the hardest part of it, I made a video to explain it. The hardest part of it was kind of explaining what the experiment was about.
Right.
But I just wanted them to think about, like, how would you answer this question? Like, Are they at the same time? And it's funny because out of the 12 students, only one of them did the calculation by hand to figure out that they should be different. I thought honestly that like a bunch of the students would be like, oh, I could work this out. I don't even need to like do the measurement. Only one of them did, so the others, God bless, they just jumped into it. They tried to make the measurements. And it was a length of string and 2 hex nuts.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to think of something like
there's
really
so many
inexpensive.
variations on that are cool. Now that I'm thinking about it, you could buy different size hex nuts.
Yes.
Does that make a difference?
Yes.
There's so many simple variables that you can change. You can just change that independent variable a little bit, and then vary that. And those are the things that for the next generation science standards, which we have in New York State, those are the kind of experiments that we're trying to get kids to do, which is why those new standards are so good, because you can easily talk about, without even saying independent and dependent variables, you can easily have them do the experiment and come to, and it's not even getting the quote unquote right answer. It's the process of asking better questions and having an investigation.
Yeah, totally. Scott, could you hang on just 1 second, please?
Not a problem.
That's right. Hey, what's up? Hang on, I'm just going to mute for just a second. All right, I'm back. Boom.
How are things going?
Good. It's so it was Veterans Day today.
Yep.
The kids had the day off of school. My wife's out of town right now with family, and so the schedule is a little bit disrupted here, anyways. So this is a little bit, but it's nice to be able to stay up a little later.
Well, I got to sleep in today myself because I'm a teacher, so like usually Wednesdays are like my crazy days because we have block, and I have usually I go straight from beginning to end with like maybe a half an hour for lunch, so it's usually like, and it's the middle of the week, so it's like it's usually pretty crazy, but there are days
but
like that. Today I'm kind of like, I'm actually like more awake and like not as frazzled for this chat. So I'm like, yeah, I'm actually.
Well, I feel like I've gotten some sort of like energy, like renewed burst after the last like 3 days of absolutely gorgeous weather that we've had. Like I know today turned a little bit rainy, but I feel like this weekend and like taking walks at lunchtime and stuff when it's been like 70 degrees has been like, oh my gosh, this has been like some sort of like weird recharge or something like that.
Well, and Siena is such a nice campus to walk around as well.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I've been teaching remotely, so I've actually been staying at home. So I live downtown. I live downtown Troy. So, you know, a couple times I'm just gonna like walk downtown and get like an iced coffee or something like that. And it's been nice to go to Dunkin' Donuts or something.
Oh yeah.
It's just important to kind of take a break. I think, you know, you can see it in I can see it in myself, in my colleagues, the students, definitely. Everybody's just like, we just got to get to, you know, to the end. Our classes end, like all finals have to be done by like the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And then we've got this like 2.5, 3 month break, and everybody's just like, we just got to get to that point.
What's up?
What's that?
What's that? So that is the Twitch stream. I've got like the laptop up on the side. So that's Scott. Okay. Scott's a teacher in the area. He teaches high school.
But how's that doing something different?
I've got 2 screens here because that is delayed by a few seconds. It takes a while for this video to go to the computers somewhere. And then those computers put it out to show both Scott and I, and it just takes time for everything to be processed. That's why there's a delay of a few seconds. Science.
Amazing.
Very cool.
It is really cool.
Are you kidding me?
So awesome stuff.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, there's some days where I'm just like, I know like where I'm teaching 2 classes, and in between I might have office hours or student meetings or something, and then, you know, there's drop off in the morning, pick up in the afternoon, and I feel like, oh my gosh, I've had no time to kind of like think about things that I want to. Like I only have time to think about things that I have to, like how to teach this class, how am I going to explain this concept, how do I grade this? And I feel this is one of the things that a lot of us are missing again in this pandemic time when we're all so over constrained, is like that time to like ruminate upon things, like, you know.
And I think that builds because students don't have time to do that. Well, they do, but they don't. Where in a normal class, you know, as you're saying, you can see them and you can kind of see what they're thinking. You have that interaction. I can look and see a confused look, or I can, you know, kind of look over their shoulder and see what they're doing wrong, and you can have some more immediate feedback, and the student can ask for immediate, you know, guidance as well. Whereas I get a lot of questions after the fact, and that's why your inbox just floods, at least mine does, with student questions, and some of them are pretty mundane, some of them are pretty good. And sometimes it's a parent, you know, and that with all your other usual emails. And then you just get into that email slog where you can't seem to keep up. And like I said, you don't have time to ruminate because you're just reacting.
Exactly.
That's all you're doing.
Yeah. No, totally.
And you want to respond, but.
Yep. Yeah. You know, and because I'm teaching remote, I do not want the students to feel like they have to have their video cameras on, because some of them are in their dorm rooms, some of them are at home, their privacy issues. I want them to feel, you know, comfortable. So I don't require their video on. And for the first, you know, few weeks of the semester, I'd say about like half the class had the camera on. And then it was like a quarter, and now it's down to like out of 25 students, there's like 1 or 2 students that have the camera on, which is fine. But it does mean I don't have that visual reaction of like, are they getting it? You know, they're supposed to be typing a bunch of code. You know, it's an introduction to programming class with Python. But I don't get to wander the room and see the problems. I mean, they can still stop me and ask questions, and they can like share their screen, but it's a minority of students that are doing that. And as you said, you can get the questions after, but that's different than doing like the real-time feedback.
Because essentially you're teaching it again almost, because you're like, oh, if you just asked it at that point, I could have, we'd be done, right? I would easily could have answered that and we could have moved on, because guess what? Usually if one person has that question, someone else does.
Yeah.
So often you get the same question twice. And at least, I think, well, at least you're, doing the work, right? And you have questions, but it does become that time suck that remote learning is, where that class that should have just been, an hour really takes you more time because you're reacting to the questions afterwards. Yeah. And I feel it's my job to respond. I'm the teacher, and that's
100%,
what you're supposed to do. But that's why you end up having no time, because you're always answering questions, essentially.
Yeah, and I think that leading into the semester, and I find that during the semester, I realize that how compressed the students' time are, and I feel like I'm putting a lot more time into organizing things on the course webpage and organizing a lot of stuff in advance, where I feel when it was in the classroom and you're kind of seeing people every day, you've got a little bit more flexibility to be organic and kind of adjust things on the fly. If you feel like we need to spend a bit more time on this, we're going to do this. I'm going to come up with some activity tonight. I'll post it tomorrow. And now I feel like things have to be a bit more constrained, a bit more really okay, even if I mentioned it in class, I got to post it online, because everybody's becoming incredibly reliant on, the course calendars and stuff like that. And that takes time. It takes time for me to post all those things.
Yep.
Yeah. But like you said, this is our job. It's totally cool. It's how it is and everything.
Yep. And funny thing this year, my district moved to block scheduling. And I don't know if you're.
So what does that mean? What does block scheduling mean? I don't think I'm as familiar with that.
It means you do 2 periods at the same time. So instead of classes being 45 minutes, they're an hour and a half, which usually is great for science, because then I can if I can have kind of that lecture kind of part for beginning of class, and then have plenty of time to work through a lab if I need to. Or I could just spend an hour and a half from my 8th grade classes, especially just working on a lab, which, in 45 minutes, a lot of times it's your first 15 minutes is just getting all the kids in and settled and tell you what to do. And then you have 100%. Maybe 20 minutes to work on a lab, and then you do your closure and they're gone. So block for science is, I've done it before when early days teaching, and I enjoyed it for that reason for science. But of course, what's frustrating is I don't have that benefit because a lot of the materials kids can't use, right? They can't, because of contamination, and I don't have that many students. For myself, I'll have 2 or 3 kids in the room, and then the other 18 are at home. And so I'm kind of so it becomes really tough, because in essence, hybrid, which is that model that we're doing, is hard, because you end up high flex. You end up having 2 preps because you want to prep something for those kids. I'm God, if they're coming in, I want them to do something, you know. So, which is easier with physics, I think, with nuts and strings, but with wet chemistry, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, you can't send them home with a bunch of chemicals that they could accidentally blow. So when you're saying you're meeting for twice the time, does that mean you're meeting for half as many days?
So so we took our 8-period day, and you do 4 periods in one day, you do the other 4 the next day.
Got it.
And then you do it again and again. So you alternate it like that. Which is good. That's why you have it usually on a block. You have an on day and an off day, because your lunch and your prep were built in there. And so my on day is I have a whole bunch of classes, and then the off day I'll have my lunch in there. But you have an hour and a half lunch. Plenty of time to do what you need to do and prep for labs, because sometimes, as you know, between, having to go out and talk to a colleague, answering phone calls and some emails, now you have to prep a lab, and you're okay, I ran out of time. I miss some of the interactions with my colleagues on campus, because I'm doing everything remote, but at the same time, I am finding it is buying me a bit more time.
I'm not commuting to campus, sometimes losing 15, 20, not losing, that's not the right word, but spending those 15, 20 minutes in the hallway, maybe talking to someone else, which is good. It's part of, the benefits of being in a, campus environment, but it eats up time, that you may need to just like respond to just get a couple of emails out of the way here.
Especially if you're talking to that one person that won't stop.
Right. Yeah. And that too. And that is like, I have to practice this derivation that I'm going to walk through the students, and I need to go through it. Yeah, it's, we're all trying to find our way. And, I don't want to be the voice of doom, but I think the spring term will be very similar to how the fall term has been. And then maybe next fall, I feel like things might start to return to a bit more normalcy. But
right now, let's talk about, since I know students that are going to be graduating, right, and even right now they're looking at going to college.
Yeah.
My own oldest daughter is now a junior.
Oh my gosh!
At Bethlehem. So she's not going into physics or science though. So she's an art student.
That's okay.
Which is
good
cool.
for her. My mom's an artist. My mom's an artist.
So, but what's that going to look like as far as applications? And I don't know. It just seems like a really weird time right now. Like, how are you recruiting, for your own programs?
Right.
There's no Regents exams, right?
No Regents exams, no essay for grad schools. Many schools are dropping the GRE requirements, even the general GRE requirements and stuff. Right. So it's a great question, because I think right now we're getting, hopefully, I'm getting it informally, and hopefully our admissions department is getting it a bit more formally, feedback from students as to how this semester went. And I think the majority of the students, like the freshmen, they're so happy to have been on a campus, for their freshman year. Like, this is what they've been looking forward to for some of them, since elementary school, going off to college. And, they have their roommates, and, they may have to go in smaller numbers to the cafeteria, but they can still go to the cafeteria. They may have to wear masks, but they're on campus, they're out of the home. They are, being adults. Some of them academically have really struggled because they are still learning how to self-discipline and organize their time. Like, there are some students that are doing fine with, a lot of the remote video or other restrictions. But there are some students that, because this really relies on a lot of internal discipline, they're still learning that. And they're learning it under like a real, tough situation. And even though many of us are really being understanding, it's still a struggle for them. I believe that by far the majority of our students are going to be coming back in the spring. They've gone through their first fall semester and they enjoyed it enough, they'll be back. And I think many, many, many people feel that next fall will be more normal, whether it's because of vaccines that are starting to come out, whether it's because we've just learned how to deal with things better and we're doing things like wastewater management and stuff like that. So if I think about recruiting, I think most places that are similar to Siena are going to emphasize that students are still getting this kind of like life experience that college, does deliver. This making friends, learning to stand on your own, learning the content, whether it's art or science or whatever, but you're also kind of learning to be your own person and to have much more agency in your learning process. And I think that is something that Siena is still going to emphasize, as I'm sure, other colleges are, that this is still a place to kind of grow and become the person that you want to be, even if it's a more difficult situation. I know that Siena has relaxed some of the rules a bit about living at home instead of on campus and stuff. And I think there'll still be people who do that, choose to live at home and commute. But I think if you talk to like all the students on campus, they are so happy that they were able to be on campus, right? Because there was a period of time, I think, where it looked like the entire country was not going to have any students on campus.
Yep.
Right. It felt like there was like a 48-hour period where people like no college is going to open. And then people learned how to do stuff safely, whether it's through an incredible amount of testing or masks and wiping and stuff like that. And I think that people have mostly learned how to do this pretty safely in some parts of the country. We are very lucky in New York that we're not seeing the rates that we're seeing in other parts of the country. And if we were, Siena would have shut down. Poor, SUNY Oneonta shut down after 2 weeks or something. We've been very lucky in the Capital District. We've been lucky in New York State. We'll see what happens in February.
Right.
But I think that's what people will be. And, look, I agree with you. This is not perfect for learning. There are some students actually that I think are doing better than if they were in the classroom, especially like I've heard from some students, they're neuroatypical that get very distracted by like noise in the classrooms. And when they can watch the video in their own, environments and stuff, they do better with it. But I think overall, for the most part, everybody's doing fine. Everybody's learning physics. Everybody's learning math and stuff like that. I think it's still a good experience, but I hope at least at Siena, and I'm sure other colleges are going to do this, we do a real like triage debriefing of what happened this academic year and really learn how to like improve things going forward for everybody, as everything else.
Think of how many people learn how to do video,
Yes.
And then those atypical students might always have a resource.
Yes. No, I think about that a lot, this high flex. Like I will still continue to like stream and record all my videos, even if things go back to normal, because it does make it a lot easier for students, especially if they have, if they're working outside of the classroom or off campus and they've got a lot of things going on and they need to go back and review things. I have become much more aware of how making the video and the recordings available can really help students.
Yeah. Well, even back in the day, I had a tape recorder. I'd take the lectures at college and I'd record. There were certain ones I'd record because the professor just went, too fast and it was too early in the morning. So it was just, all right, I'm going to take notes now and I'll do it again later as well. I remember to make sure I didn't forget anything,
Yep.
So it's not, but that was on my end as the student doing it. I think now it would have been great if you had like the actual lecture recorded by the professor every day.
I know. And then you go home with your VHS tape and like
we're in the back of class with a huge thing on my shoulder.
Right. And Scott, I'm probably going to have to go in about 10 minutes or so.
All right.
Wait. No. 10 minutes.
No,
I know. I'm just going to talk to Scott a little bit longer, and then we'll go.
We're going to end things up pretty soon. Last thing, I know when I talked to you, a few summers ago, you were very much into recruiting, women into your program, into physics at Siena. How has that been going? Are you successful still? Is that something you're still obviously working at?
No, I would say, I think we are successful, but I will paraphrase Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? Ruth Bader Ginsburg was asked, when will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? And she said, when there are 9, because there were 9 men for the longest time. Why can't there be 9 women at some point? So Siena's actually been recognized by the American Physics Society as being one of the most successful colleges in the country. We had a 5-year running average. I think that was what they used, and 40% of the graduates were women, which is incredibly atypical for physics. That is not a typical physics environment. And I think it's a credit to the department as a whole, but in particular, Dr. Rose Finn, who was our chair for a number of years, and Dr. Michelle McColgan, who are both women, and I think are usually very front and center at recruiting meeting when we have high school students visit. And they are very involved in the first year experience, for the students, so that the students see very quickly that you can be a successful scientist and a woman. And so I think as a whole, the department has been quite successful in recruiting and retaining women. And I think it starts with, the faculty, not just as a whole recognizing it, but that students can see themselves in the faculty. I think that that's important. And then, beyond that, just kind of people being aware enough to create an environment that is supportive, and recognizing that people, whether they're women or students of color, that every student's experience is going to be different, that even well-meaning departments have, biases, and you want to create both research groups and classroom experiences that really kind of speak to an individual student's needs, and it doesn't mean that you're playing favorites. It's just that you recognize that different students kind of have different needs about what they want to feel like safe or respected, or included in the environment.
Right. And like success breeds success at this point, almost.
Very much so. So the other thing, and I think that's exact, because I've seen it in my research groups as well. Like very early at Siena, some of the first couple students that chose to work with me were women. And I think that word of mouth, then they talk to the next generation of students who are looking, and they're like, oh, Professor Bellis's group, it's a good experience. You get to travel, you feel safe and respected. And so when we have recruiting meetings with recruiting sounds too harsh, but when you're meeting with prospective students, we often have our own current students there. And they are by far our best ambassadors. So they can speak to the positive experiences they've had. And I think that means more to prospective students hearing it come from students than the faculty.
That's true. Yep. Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think Michelle McCulkin, she's the one that does the physics in Minecraft, and she's done that with the city schools. I've met her a couple of times.
Urban scholars and stuff like that. And I think that that's good, and we're all trying to reach out to younger students. I will make a very early advertisement that eventually I will be reaching out to you, Scott, for testing, to maybe test in your classrooms. So I've been working for about the past year and a half with some students to develop a board game based on quantum mechanics.
Oh, I remember you talking about that before. Yep.
And so it had started off, it was going to be something kind of high level for college, and now it's drifted to like the middle school, high school level stuff. And the idea is to try to get people thinking about things about quantum mechanics, even without teaching people stuff, just learning the concepts and having people think about it outside of the classroom. So it's not like you're taking this for a class, you're just thinking about it. And it's been interesting because we're now at the stage where we're trying to finalize all the graphic design. And I've been working with
down through this. Okay.
No, I think it's going to be
When's
really
the
good.
Kickstarter?
So it's actually available. It'll be available for order from a website where you kind of upload your game design, and then anybody can order it from there. Right. But we're going to try to order a bunch of copies to put into the hands of local teachers. And I've been working with a professor in the creative arts department, Gigi Gatewood. She is a graphic designer, photographer, and one of her students doing a minor, Abby Huffman, who's amazing, has been putting this together. And so we've been working together on the graphic design and the rule book. And what's been really interesting, if I was to design this myself, and sometimes I've sketched out things, but I'm not a good artist, I can tell it comes from a very boring, stodgy scientist, honestly, kind of this male point of view. And my wife, at first I had this really kind of pedantic approach to the game. And my wife is look, if you want people to have fun with it, it should be fun. It should be a party. And she had this idea of quantum party, and there's these cats that are the player pieces and stuff. And it's nothing that I necessarily would have come up with on my own.
Right.
And I think that my wife has a much more, even though she's a scientist, she has a much more natural idea of play. And then Abby, the student, and the professor, who are women, have come up with a color palette and just a design that I know I never would have come up with.
Yeah.
And I can already see that just, the subtle aspect of their point of view has made this game, I think, what's going to be appealing to a much broader range of people. And I think this speaks to just this idea of diversity in research groups, diversity of projects, getting different inputs, getting things that speak to a broader group of young scientists or new scientists coming forward.
I mean,
this is where I think you start to benefit.
So just, teenage boys would have played it, right? I mean, you could have made it like that, but you
exactly
didn't. You got to find that perfect medium where everyone kind of gets into it, and that's what makes it a good game.
Yes.
Also, I'm part of the New York State Master Teacher Program, and I lead their gaming learning team. So
nice.
So I can easily present it to not only my group that I work with for games and education, but also with all of the New York State Master Teacher Program, because it's a statewide organization.
Yep.
So
I've spoken at the lab day that they sometimes have in like the spring and stuff like that. And I'm hoping it'll be done by the spring.
Last time I saw you was there actually.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Yes. So I'm hoping that this will be done by the end of the winter break, fingers crossed. And I'm hoping to have copies to distribute to the teachers that I know in the area and start to get feedback as to how this is. Think about the next, generation of games that, might work on. But yeah, I will be reaching out to you to see if
I will say
it's
going to be hard to play a game if you can't actually be with other people.
I know. No, I
can't
know.
actually play with my kids.
I know.
I can play with my family,
and that is fine. That's good enough. That's good enough.
I think it's worthwhile to kind of plan that out, because eventually we will be able to get with other people and play games. I mean,
yeah, definitely.
Please,
definitely.
that has to happen.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, definitely. Keep me in mind with that. I do play testing with my kids at school all the time. I always look.
Nice.
For ways to, because it's fun, and God forbid the kids actually learn something.
Gamification of education. I think this means different things to different people. What I want to try to come up with scenarios where the students are thinking about the science or about the class, the learning goals outside of the classroom. And not just for homework. I want to come up with interesting enough scenarios that whether it's a game or some other project where they are thinking about it kind of on their own without me kind of this is an assignment you've got to turn in and stuff like that. And that's hard. And one way to do that, I think, is with games and stuff.
That's one way.
So let's say, one way.
Okay. I'll let you go because you have someone that's very in need of your attention.
He's been so good so far.
Yes, he's reaching his last legs out. You're gonna turn around and be asleep on the floor.
I know. Scott, this was great. I would love to do this again sometime if you're ever looking for a warm body. I'm sure there's tons of things that we didn't cover, but maybe we'll get a chance to do it again.
There's more stuff, especially when you have the game ready and stuff. We can talk about that for sure.
I would love to do that. That's going to be awesome.
Yeah, just let me know. And thanks for coming in. I'll be taking this. We'll put it on YouTube as well, so it'll be available there.
Good. Let me know when it is. I'll send it to a few people I know. I think they'll get a kick out of it.
Cool. All right,
Scott. Cool.
Thank you very much. Bye.
All right. Take care, Scott. I'll talk to you, dude. Bye.